A Delta Force operator frozen in terror stares into the eyes of a 25-foot anaconda coiling around his chest, crushing the life from his lungs. His team paralyzed in the water, their weapons useless against this nightmare of muscle and rage. They have seconds before his ribs snap like twigs. But from the dense jungle comes something impossible, a sound that doesn't belong in the Amazon. The high-pitched bark of a German Shepherd puppy. Not just any puppy, the smallest, weakest member of their unit. A 6-month-old K9 trainee, they almost left behind at base, and this tiny creature is about to do what an entire team of America's most elite warriors cannot. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The Amazon rainforest doesn't care about your training, your weapons, or your rank. It's a green hell where nature makes the rules, and humans are just visitors. This is the story of Operation Serpent's Nest, a classified Delta Force mission that went catastrophically wrong in the deepest part of the Peruvian Amazon, and the most unlikely hero you could ever imagine. A German Shepherd puppy named Titan, who weighed barely 40 pounds and had never seen combat, a pup so small, the team nicknamed him Mistake, because bringing him into the jungle seemed like the worst decision anyone had ever made. But sometimes the smallest warriors have the biggest hearts, and on one nightmare afternoon in water, the color of blood, this puppy would prove that courage doesn't come from size, strength, or experience. It comes from something deeper, something that can't be trained. The Pentagon doesn't hand out suicide missions, they just call them something else, like Operation Serpent's Nest. And when Captain Marcus Shaw received the briefing in a windowless room 3 floors below the Department of Defense, he knew immediately this wasn't going to be a standard interdiction. Here's what they told him: a weapons trafficking network had been operating along the Ucayali River system in the Peruvian Amazon for 18 months, funneling military-grade hardware from corrupt South American officials to insurgent groups across 3 continents we're talking about. Surface-to-air missiles, armor-piercing rounds, encrypted communication systems, the kind of gear that turns a rebel group into an army, the kind of gear that shoots down commercial airliners. The CIA had been tracking them for a year, but every time they got close, the traffickers vanished into the jungle like smoke. The locals wouldn't talk. The Peruvian government was either compromised or incompetent, probably both. Satellite imagery was useless under that dense triple canopy. Rainforest, so they needed boots on the ground, eyes that could see what technology couldn't. They needed Delta Force. Captain Marcus Shaw was 42 years old, which is ancient. By special operations standards, most guys burn out or die young. But Shaw was different. He was a career operator who'd run missions in 13 countries across 4 continents. He had the kind of weathered face that looked carved from stone and eyes that had seen too much but never looked away. His team called him Old Man, not because he was slow, but because he had a wisdom that kept them alive when younger commanders would have gotten them killed. His team was Delta Force Team Viper's 6 operators who'd worked together for 3 years, which in the special operations world is like being married. They knew each other's breathing patterns, could communicate with glances, and move through hostile territory like a single organism with 7 minds. There was Riley, the second-in-command, a sniper from Montana, who could put a round through a keyhole at 800 meters. There was Jackson, their demolitions expert, a former college football player who looked like he could bench press a truck. There was Chen, their communications and tech specialist who could hack a satellite phone while dangling from a helicopter. There was Martinez, their medic, a soft-spoken man from Texas who'd saved more lives than he'd taken, which was saying something. And there was Brooks, their newest member, a reconnaissance specialist from Detroit who could navigate through any terrain without a compass. And then there was the 7th member, the one who shouldn't have been there at all. Titan was a 6-month-old German Shepherd puppy, and calling him a member of Team Viper was generous. He was supposed to be their future K9 unit, being trained to detect explosives, track targets, and provide tactical support. But the key word was future, as in not now, not even close. He'd barely completed basic obedience training. He still occasionally peed when he got excited, and his idea of stealth was knocking over everything in a room while trying to chase his own tail. Shaw had opposed bringing him on this mission strenuously, but the decision came from above, from people who'd never set foot in a jungle. The Pentagon had invested $200,000 in Titan's training, and they wanted their asset field tested, plus the intelligence suggested the traffickers were using drug detection dogs to scout for law enforcement, Having a canine presence might help the team blend in with other interdiction units in the area. It was bureaucratic logic, the kind that gets people killed. But Shaw was a soldier, and soldiers follow orders, even stupid ones. So Titan was coming to the Amazon. The team had taken to calling him Mistake, not out of cruelty, but out of that dark humor that special operations guys use to cope with stress. Brooks had been the first to say it during a training exercise when Titan had barked at absolutely nothing for 10 minutes straight, alerting every person within half a mile to their position that right there, sure, that's our $1 million mistake. The name stuck. They inserted at 0300 on a moonless night, dropped from a Black Hawk helicopter into a clearing 40 kilometers from the nearest village. The rotor wash flattened, the jungle grass, and the noise was deafening, but within 90 seconds, the bird was gone, and the team was alone with the darkness and the sound of a million insects screaming their presence to the world. Titan had vomited twice during the flight, which was not an auspicious beginning. The Amazon at night is not peaceful, it's a living, breathing factory of sound. Every tree, every leaf, every pocket of stagnant water is vibrating with life, trying to eat, mate, or avoid being eaten. The air itself feels thick, like you're breathing through a wet towel, and the humidity is so complete that your sweat doesn't evaporate, it just accumulates until you feel like you're drowning on dry land. Shaw watched through night vision as his team formed up, their movements efficient and silent, years of training overriding the body's natural response to this hostile environment. Titan sat at his feet, panting heavily, his puppy eyes wide and confused, taking in smells and sounds he'd never experienced in all his months of training at Fort Bragg. "This is going to be interesting," Riley muttered over the team's encrypted comms. They moved through the jungle using a navigation route Chen had programmed based on satellite imagery and CIA intelligence. The terrain was brutal, a nightmare of roots and vines, and hidden drops where the ground just disappeared into CIA blackness. They were heading toward a tributary of the Ucayali, where the traffickers had been spotted moving cargo 3 weeks prior. The plan was simple: establish an observation post, gather intelligence on the network's logistics and leadership, and radio for extraction once they had actionable targeting data. Simple plans never survive contact with the Amazon. The first 3 days were textbook. They covered 20 kilometers, moving only at night, and lying up in hide sites during the day. When the heat became murderous, they found the tributary exactly where it was supposed to be, a slow-moving channel of brown water that looked thick enough to walk on. They established an overwatch position on a ridge that gave them clear sightlines to a natural bottleneck where boats would have to slow down to navigate fallen trees. They saw nothing: no boats, no traffickers, no sign of human activity at all, just the river and the jungle and the suffocating presence of being watched. Because here's what the briefing hadn't prepared them for: the Amazon isn't empty, it's full, but it's full of things that don't want you there. Shaw had operated in deserts and mountains, and urban warfare zones, and none of it felt like this. The jungle wasn't hostile. It was indifferent. It would consume you without malice, the way your body consumes oxygen, just a natural process. Titan was struggling. The puppy had been trained in controlled environments, with air conditioning and regular meals and handlers, who went home at the end of the day. This was so far beyond his experience that Shaw could see him shutting down. He wouldn't eat the high-calorie paste Martinez tried to feed him. He barely drank water, and he spent most of his time pressed against Shaw's leg, trembling. "The kid's not going to make it," Jackson said on the 4th night. "We should cache him here with supplies and pick him up on extraction." Shaw considered it that would be the smart play: leave the puppy in a relatively safe position and move lighter and quieter without him, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Titan looked at him with those confused puppy eyes that still held total trust. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of his own first deployment, when he'd been just as lost and terrified. "He stays with us," Shaw said, and that was the end of the discussion. On the 5th day, everything changed. They were doing a routine patrol sweep, expanding their observation radius, when Brooks, who was on point, froze his fist, went up in the signal for halt, and the entire team melted into the vegetation without a sound. Shaw low crawled forward until he was next to Brooks and followed his gaze. There was a camp. It was recent, maybe 48 hours old. You could tell from the way the disturbed vegetation hadn't quite sprung back yet. There were the remains of a fire, carefully buried, but still detectable to trained eyes. There were scuff marks where crates had been dragged, and most tellingly, there were cigarette butts, American brands, the expensive kind. But here's what made Shaw's blood run cold: the camp had been abandoned in a hurry. Supplies left behind, food still in containers, gear scattered like people had dropped everything and run, and everywhere on every surface were marks. Deep gouges in the wood of the trees, scratches that went through bark, and into the heartwood itself. They were too big to be from any cat Shaw knew about, and too methodical. The pattern was wrong, like something had gripped the trees and pulled itself up, using them as leverage. "What the hell does that?" Riley breathed. Chen was already photographing everything, his camera clicking softly. They spent an hour cataloging the site, and the more they found the worse it got. There were boot prints from at least 8 men, all leaving the camp heading south toward the river in a running pattern you could tell from the depth and spacing they'd been fleeing, and in the soft mud near what had been their water supply, there was another print. It wasn't human, it wasn't from any animal in Shaw's mental database. It looked almost like a ribbed tire mark, except organic, a series of overlapping curves, each one as thick as Shaw's thigh, and the print was fresh, recent, enough that water was still seeping into the depression. Martinez crouched next to it, his face pale. "Boss, I've seen something like this once before. When I was training with a herpetologist in Florida, we were tracking invasive pythons. This is a snake print, a big one." "How big?" Shaw asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Martinez stood up and pointed to a tree about 20 feet away. Then he pointed to another tree, the same distance in the opposite direction. If this thing was stretched out between those 2 trees, it still wouldn't be at full length that big. Nobody spoke for a long moment, because that was impossible. The longest anaconda ever reliably measured was less than 18 feet, and even that was exceptional. What Martinez was describing would be over 30 feet long, a creature that shouldn't exist. "We need to report this," Chen said, reaching for his satellite uplink, but when he extended the antenna and powered up the unit, his face went slack. The LED that should have shown green for connection stayed red. He tried 3 times adjusting angles and frequencies. "Nothing. It's being jammed," he said. "Which means someone doesn't want us talking to command." Shaw's mind was racing. The traffickers had vanished. There were signs of something massive in the area, and now their communications were being actively blocked. This wasn't a reconnaissance mission anymore. This was a trap. They'd been inserted into something much bigger and much stranger than a simple weapons interdiction. "Pack it up," he ordered. "We're moving to the alternate extraction point. We call this in when we're clear of whatever jamming field they've got set up." But as they prepared to move, Titan, who had been lying quietly beside Shaw, suddenly stood up. The puppy's ears went forward, his head lowered, and from his small chest came a sound Shaw had never heard from him before, a deep rumbling growl that sounded like it came from a much larger dog. Titan was staring into the jungle to the north, away from the direction they'd planned to travel, and every hair on his back was standing up. Riley followed the puppy's gaze and whispered, "Oh Jesus." There, carved into a massive ceiba tree about 50 meters away, was a symbol. It was crude, but clear-cut, deep into the wood, with something sharp, a spiral pattern that coiled in on itself like a snake, eating its tail, and below it in a language Shaw didn't recognize were words. Chen pulled up a translation app and went white. "It's Ashaninka, one of the indigenous languages," he said softly. "It translates roughly to beyond this point. The black coil hunts turn back, or feed the river with your bones." "The black coil," Martinez repeated. "I've heard that name. The guides at our staging base. They mentioned it when they found out we were going upriver. They said it was a demon that lives in the deep water. A serpent as old as the jungle, that's killed hundreds of people over generations." I thought it was just local superstition. Shaw didn't believe in demons, but he believed in threats, and something had scared experienced traffickers into abandoning valuable cargo. Something had left prints that suggested a snake the size of a school bus, and something was jamming their communications, which meant intelligence and intent. "We move now," he said. "Formation Delta Chen, you're on our 6 watch for tail. Riley, take point. Titan stays with me, and everyone keep your eyes on the water. From now on, we're not alone out here." They moved through the jungle as fast as tactical sense allowed. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound seemed louder, and Titan, that scared, confused puppy who'd been a liability for 5 days, stayed pressed against Shaw's leg, his senses on high alert, tracking something the humans couldn't see. They made camp that night on high ground as far from water as they could get, while still maintaining their route to extraction. Shaw insisted on cold camp, no fire, no hot food, nothing that would announce their presence. They set up an array, defensive perimeter with overlapping fields of fire. And for the First time in his career, Shaw ordered the team to sleep in shifts with weapons loaded and safeties off. Around midnight, when Shaw was on watch, Titan started whimpering. The puppy was staring down the slope toward a creek bed they'd crossed. An hour before, his body was rigid, his breathing quick and shallow. Shaw looked through his night vision scope and saw nothing, just the green glow of vegetation and the darker line of water. But then the water moved. Not like a current moves, not like wind creates ripples. The entire surface of the creek shifted as something beneath it displaced the water. Something massive moving upstream toward their position, slowly, methodically, like it knew exactly where they were. Shaw's hand went to his radio, then stopped. They were still being jammed. He couldn't warn the team without speaking, and speaking would give away their exact position. So he did the only thing he could do. He reached down and placed his hand on Titan's head, feeling the puppy's heart hammering against his palm. And together man and dog watched the water and waited for dawn, knowing that when the sun rose, they would have to cross 3 more rivers to reach extraction. And somewhere in those dark waters something was waiting for them. Dawn broke over the Amazon like a wound opening in the sky, blood red and ominous. Captain Marcus Shaw had learned to trust his instincts over 15 years of operations in the world's most dangerous places, and every fiber of his being was screaming that something was wrong. The river before them lay still as black glass, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of something moving beneath. Something big. "I don't like this, Captain," whispered Rodriguez, their point man, as he scanned the murky water through his scope. "Water's too calm, too quiet." Shaw knew exactly what he meant. The Amazon was never quiet. It was a symphony of screams, howler monkeys, macaws, insects, creating a wall of sound so thick you could almost touch it. But this morning, the jungle had gone silent. Even the mosquitoes seemed to be holding their breath. Behind them, little Titan whined softly, his ears pinned flat against his skull. The puppy had been acting strange all night, refusing to sleep, constantly staring at the river with those intelligent brown eyes. Shaw had dismissed it as the pup's inexperience, but now he wasn't so sure. Animals knew things humans didn't. They could sense danger in ways that no amount of training could replicate. "We need to cross here," Shaw said, checking his GPS coordinates. "Extraction point is 3 clicks north. We stay in the jungle, we'll miss our window." He looked at his team, 6 of America's finest warriors, exhausted, on edge, but still mission ready. "We move fast. Stay tight. Rodriguez, you take point. Martinez, cover our 6. Let's make this quick and clean." The team began their crossing, weapons held high above the water, moving in a tactical line formation. The river was chest deep at its center, the current stronger than it looked. The water was the color of old coffee, making it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. Shaw hated water operations, too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. Titan remained on the shore, dancing nervously back and forth, that same persistent whine building in his throat. Shaw made a mental note to have the pup checked by the vet when they got back. The little guy was clearly not ready for field operations. They were halfway across when it happened. The water exploded. There was no warning, no chance to react. One moment, their radio operator, Jenkins, was 3 feet to Shaw's left. The next moment, he was gone, yanked under the surface so fast it was like he'd never existed. The water where he'd been standing churned red and violent. "Contact!" Rodriguez screamed, spinning in the water, trying to aim at something he couldn't see. "Jenkins is down." Then Shaw saw it, and his blood turned to ice. Rising from the water like some prehistoric nightmare was a head the size of a beer keg, covered in scales that looked like ancient armor. The eyes were yellow and cold and utterly alien, not the eyes of an animal, but of something far older, far more primal. The mouth opened, revealing rows of backward curving teeth designed for one purpose: to grip prey and never let go. The anaconda's body broke the surface, and Shaw's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. Anacondas didn't get this big. The creature was as thick as a telephone pole, its body extending back into the murky water, coil after massive coil. 25 feet at least, maybe more. 500 pounds of pure muscle and prehistoric rage. "Shoot it!" Martinez was screaming, opening fire with his M4. The bullets hit the snake's thick hide, and Shaw saw them impact, but they might as well have been throwing rocks. The scales were too thick, the muscle beneath too dense. The snake didn't even flinch. Jenkins surfaced for half a second, his face a mask of terror and agony, trying to scream but only managing a wet gurgle. Then the coils wrapped around him, and Shaw heard the sound that would haunt his nightmares forever, the wet crack of breaking bones, like green wood snapping. Jenkins went limp, and the snake dragged him under again. "Get to shore," Shaw commanded, already moving, pushing his team toward the bank. But the water resisted them, thick and heavy, turning every step into an eternity. "Move, move, move." The anaconda's head swiveled toward them with terrifying speed, tasting the air with a black forked tongue. It had made its kill, but it wasn't satisfied. Shaw had read about this large constrictors could go months without eating. But when they found abundant prey, their ancient programming told them to kill as much as they could. Rodriguez made it to the shore first, turning to provide covering fire. Martinez was right behind him. But Shaw felt the current shift, felt the displacement of water that meant something massive was moving toward him fast. The impact hit him from the side like a freight train. The snake's body wrapped around his chest in one smooth, horrifying motion. Shaw had trained for hand-to-hand combat with the best fighters in the world. He'd been in situations where men tried to choke him out, overpower him, break him. This was nothing like that. This was being caught in a vice made of living steel. The pressure was immediate and absolute. Shaw felt his ribs creak, felt the air being forced from his lungs in one explosive gasp. He tried to bring his weapon up, but his arms were pinned. He tried to move, to fight, to do anything, but the coils tightened with every breath he tried to take. The snake's body was cool and dry, and impossibly strong, each muscle working independently, finding gaps in his tactical vest, crushing the life from him with mechanical precision. His team was screaming his name. Through the red haze creeping into his vision, Shaw could see them at the shore, weapons up, but they couldn't shoot. The risk of hitting him was too high. He felt himself being dragged deeper into the river, felt the water close over his head. The snake was taking him to the bottom, where it would hold him until he drowned, until his lungs gave up and pulled water instead of air. This was how he was going to die. Not in a firefight with terrorists, not jumping out of a plane, not in any of the 100 ways he'd imagined over his career. He was going to be drowned by a prehistoric monster in a river whose name he didn't even know. His chest felt like it was being crushed in a car compactor. He could feel his ribs beginning to separate, the cartilage tearing. The pain was beyond description, beyond anything he'd ever experienced. His vision was darkening at the edges, tunneling down to a single point of light. And then, through the water and the pain and the approaching darkness, Shaw heard something impossible, a bark, high-pitched and desperate, the sound of a puppy. On the shore, Titan was experiencing something that his 6-month-old brain could barely comprehend. Absolute terror mixed with an overwhelming need to act. His handler, his person, his whole world was in the water, was hurting, was dying. Titan could smell the fear scent coming off the other humans, could hear their weapons making that loud noise that hurt his ears, could see the massive dark shape in the water that had taken his person away. Every instinct Titan possessed was screaming at him to run. The thing in the water was a predator, an apex predator, something that even his wolf ancestors would have fled from. The smell of it was wrong, cold and ancient, and full of death. Titan's legs were shaking, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. He wanted to run into the jungle, to hide, to let the bigger humans handle this. But his person was in the water. His person, who fed him and played with him, and let him sleep in his bunk, even though it was against regulations. His person, who was patient when Titan made mistakes during training, who scratched behind his ears in exactly the right spot, who talked to him in that soft voice that meant safety and love and home. Titan took a step toward the water, then another. His legs were still shaking, but they were moving. Rodriguez saw him and yelled, "No, Titan, stay! Stay!" But Titan didn't know how to stay. Not when his person was hurting. Not when every fiber of his being was telling him that he had to do something, anything, even though he was small and scared and had never been in a real fight in his entire short life. The water was cold when Titan's paws touched it. He'd never been a strong swimmer. Most of his water training had been in controlled pools at the base, with handlers ready to pull him out if he struggled. This water was nothing like that. It was dark and fast and full of things that wanted to hurt him. But his person was out there. Titan launched himself into the river and began to swim. His puppy paddle was awkward and splashy. Nothing like the efficient movement of a trained water dog. His head barely stayed above the surface, and he kept getting mouthfuls of the terrible-tasting water. But he kept swimming, kept moving toward the place where the dark shape held his person. The other humans were yelling at him, but Titan didn't understand their words anymore. The only thing that existed was the need to reach his person, to help, to do what he was born to do, even if he didn't fully understand what that was yet. He reached the snake, and up close it was even more terrifying. The body was as thick as Titan's entire body length, covered in scales that looked like armor. The coils moved with a horrible, squeezing rhythm, and Titan could see his person in the center of them, his face barely above water, his eyes closed. For a moment, Titan froze. What could he possibly do against this thing? He was 40 pounds of puppy, the snake was a monster. But then his person's head slipped under the water, and something inside Titan just snapped. The trainers at the K9 Academy would later try to explain what happened next, using terms like prey drive activation and protective instinct override. They would talk about how German shepherds were bred for centuries to protect their handlers, how that instinct was coded so deep into their DNA that it could override even the most powerful fear response. But really, it was simpler than that. Titan loved his person, and his person needed him, and nothing else mattered. The puppy launched himself at the anaconda's head with a snarl that didn't sound like it could come from something so small. His puppy teeth, still sharp as needles, found purchase on the snake's face, right near its eye. He bit down with all the strength in his tiny jaws and held on. The effect was immediate and electric. The anaconda's head whipped around, its yellow eyes focusing on this tiny attacker with what almost looked like surprise. Nothing attacked anacondas. Nothing was stupid enough, suicidal enough, to bite a fully grown constrictor. But Titan wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about his person. The snake tried to turn its head, tried to orient its mouth toward this painful little pest. But Titan's small size was actually an advantage. He was too close to the head, too quick, darting in and out like a furious mosquito. Every time the snake moved, Titan moved with it, his teeth finding new purchase, tearing at the sensitive tissue around the eyes and nostrils. Then Titan did something that would be analyzed by animal behaviorists for years afterward. He went for the eye itself. His teeth punctured the outer membrane, and the snake let out a sound like escaping steam, a hiss so loud it seemed to vibrate the air itself. And critically, fatally for its attack, the anaconda loosened its coils. It was only for a second, maybe less. An instinctive reaction to protect its eyes, to deal with this tiny threat, before returning to the business of killing the human in its grasp. But a second was all Shaw's team needed. Rodriguez and Martinez hit the water at a full run, weapons forgotten, hands reaching. They grabbed Shaw's tactical vest and pulled with every ounce of strength they possessed, pulled against the weight of a 500-pound snake that wasn't quite ready to give up its meal. The anaconda's attention snapped back to Shaw, and it began to constrict again, harder this time, trying to finish the kill quickly so it could deal with the annoying puppy. Shaw felt his ribs crack, felt something tear inside his chest. He tried to scream but had no air to scream with. Titan saw his person being hurt again and went absolutely berserk. The puppy that had been afraid of thunderstorms and vacuum cleaners attacked the anaconda with a fury that seemed impossible for something so small. He clawed at the snake's face with his front paws, bit anything he could reach, made himself into such an annoying, painful nuisance that the ancient reptile brain of the anaconda had to recalculate. One prey or the other. It couldn't handle both. The coils opened. Shaw was pulled backward through the water, his team dragging him toward shore with desperate strength. And the anaconda, finally free to deal with this tiny tormentor, lunged at Titan with its mouth open wide, those backward curving teeth ready to grip and hold and drag the puppy down to a dark death at the bottom of the river. But Titan was already moving. His small size and puppy reflexes saved him. He twisted in the water, the snake's jaws closing on empty space where he'd been a fraction of a second before. The displacement of water from the strike sent the puppy tumbling, sent him under the surface, but he kicked and struggled, and his head broke back into the air. Swim, Titan, swim. Rodriguez was screaming from the shore, already running back into the water, reaching. Titan swam like his life depended on it, because it did. Behind him, he could hear the water churning, could sense the massive body of the anaconda coming after him, could feel death itself reaching out with cold coils. His paws hit the shallows. He was running now, half swimming, half scrambling. Rodriguez's hands closed around his collar and yanked him forward, out of the water, to safety. Just as the anaconda's head burst from the surface one more time, mouth open in a strike that missed by inches, the snake stopped at the water's edge, its yellow eyes fixed on the humans clustered on the shore. For a long moment, there was a standoff, ancient predator and modern warriors, neither backing down. Then, slowly, the massive body began to sink back into the dark water, coil by coil, until only the eyes remained visible. Then those too disappeared, leaving only ripples and the taste of fear in the air. On the shore, Shaw was coughing up river water, his ribs screaming in agony, but alive. Alive because of his team. Alive because they'd pulled him out. Alive because a 40-pound puppy had been brave enough to attack a monster. Titan collapsed next to Shaw, his entire body shaking with exhaustion and shock. Shaw's hand, moving slowly, painfully, found the puppy's wet fur and held on like it was the only real thing in the world. "Good boy," Shaw managed to whisper through broken ribs and burning lungs. "Good boy, Titan. Good boy." And in that moment, by that dark river, with death still watching from the water, the puppy finally understood what he'd been born to do. Not because he was big or strong or fearless, but because when his person needed him, nothing else mattered. Not fear, not size, not the impossible odds, just love, just loyalty, just the unbreakable bond between a warrior and his dog. They had maybe 10 minutes before the anaconda decided to come back, maybe less. Shaw knew this with the same certainty he knew his own name. Apex predators didn't give up easily, especially when they'd been injured and humiliated. That snake had lost prey, had been attacked by something it probably viewed as an insult to its dominance. It would be back, angrier and more aggressive than before. "We move now," Shaw gasped, trying to stand and immediately collapsing back to his knees. The pain in his chest was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, a grinding, tearing agony that suggested things inside him were broken in ways that weren't supposed to be broken. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. Martinez was already stripping Shaw's tactical vest, checking for injuries. His face went pale when he saw the bruising already forming across Shaw's torso, deep purple and black marks that looked like someone had beaten him with a baseball bat. "Captain, you've got broken ribs, maybe punctured lung. We need to call for emergency medevac." "No time," Shaw interrupted, spitting blood. That wasn't a good sign, he knew. Internal bleeding. That thing knows we're here, we're in its territory, and it's injured and pissed off. We stay here, we're dead. All of us. Rodriguez was scanning the river through his scope, weapon raised. "He's right. I can see movement in the water. Something big, circling. It's not leaving." "How far to extraction?" asked Thompson, their navigator, already pulling out his GPS with shaking hands. The big man had seen combat in 3 different war zones, but Shaw could see the fear in his eyes. They'd all been trained to fight humans, to understand human tactics and psychology. But this was something primal, something that bypassed all their training and spoke directly to the scared apes they'd been a million years ago. 2.8 kilometers, Thompson said, his voice tight, through dense jungle, at normal pace, maybe 40 minutes. With the captain injured, he didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what he meant. Shaw looked down at Titan. The puppy was lying in a puddle of river water and his own exhausted trembling, his sides heaving, his paws raw and bleeding from the scramble up the muddy bank. The little guy had given everything he had. Shaw had seen grown men, trained warriors, freeze in situations less terrifying than what that puppy had just faced. But Titan had run toward the danger, not away from it. "Can you walk, little man?" Shaw whispered, reaching down to touch the puppy's head. Titan's eyes opened, those intelligent brown eyes that had seen too much for a 6-month-old, and somehow, impossibly, his tail gave a weak thump against the ground. "He's done, Captain," Martinez said quietly. "He can barely move. I can carry him." "You need your hands free for weapons," Shaw interrupted. "We're all going to be carrying something." He looked at Thompson. "Rig me a sling, something that can hold the pup against my chest. I'll carry him." "Sir, with respect, you can barely stand, carrying extra weight." "That's an order, Thompson." Shaw's voice had the steel in it that had led men through situations where death was certain and survival was just a pleasant dream. "That dog saved my life. All our lives. We're not leaving him behind." The truth was, Shaw wasn't sure he could make it 2.8 kilometers through jungle terrain with broken ribs and internal bleeding. Adding the weight of a 40-pound puppy might be the thing that killed him. But he'd be damned if he left Titan behind after what the little warrior had just done. They moved fast, creating a makeshift sling from a tactical pack and some paracord. Shaw gritted his teeth as they lifted Titan and secured him against Shaw's chest. The puppy whined softly, but then seemed to understand, seemed to settle against Shaw's body with a trust that made Shaw's throat tight. "Weapons ready," Shaw commanded. "Rodriguez on point, Martinez on 6. Thompson, you navigate. We move fast but smart. That river system runs through this whole area. The snake could pop up anywhere there's deep water. We see water, we go around. I don't care if it adds distance. Everyone clear?" A chorus of, "Yes, sir," answered him. "And if I fall," Shaw continued, his voice dropping, "you keep moving. You get to extraction. That's an order." "Like hell," Rodriguez muttered, but Shaw let it slide. They were beyond regulations now, beyond rank and protocol. They were brothers, and brothers didn't leave brothers behind. They started moving. The Amazon jungle is beautiful from a distance, a carpet of green stretching to the horizon, full of life and color and wonder. Up close, it's a nightmare of heat and humidity, and things that want to bite you, sting you, or eat you. The canopy above blocked out most of the sunlight, creating a twilight world of shadows and strange sounds. Vines grabbed at their boots. Insects swarmed around their heads. The air was so thick with moisture it felt like breathing soup. And somewhere behind them, in the network of rivers and streams that veined through this green hell, a 500-pound anaconda was hunting. Shaw focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Each step sent spikes of agony through his chest. He could feel something grinding inside him, could taste blood in the back of his throat. The weight of Titan against his chest was actually helping in a weird way. The puppy's warm body was acting like a compress, and the steady rhythm of Titan's heartbeat gave Shaw something to focus on besides the pain. They'd been moving for maybe 15 minutes when they heard a sound that made every man freeze in his tracks. A splash. Close. Too close. "Movement right," Rodriguez hissed, weapon snapping up to aim at a stream they'd been paralleling. The water was dark and still, but now they could see ripples, could see something large moving just beneath the surface. "Keep moving," Shaw ordered. "Don't engage unless it attacks. We can't afford to waste ammo or time." They skirted the stream, giving it a wide berth, every man's eyes locked on that dark water. Shaw could feel Titan's body tensing against his chest, could hear the low growl building in the puppy's throat. Even exhausted and injured, Titan was trying to warn them, trying to protect them. "Good boy," Shaw whispered. "I know, I see it too." The ripples followed them for 100 meters, then disappeared. But Shaw knew it wasn't gone. The snake was tracking them, using the river system to move faster than they could move through the jungle. It had home field advantage, knew this terrain in ways they never could. They pushed on. 20 minutes became 30. Shaw's vision was starting to blur at the edges, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. His body was going into shock. He recognized the symptoms. Martinez kept glancing back at him with increasing concern. "Captain, you need to rest." "Keep moving," Shaw gasped. Stopping meant dying. It was that simple. Titan shifted in the sling, and Shaw felt a wet nose press against his neck. The puppy was checking on him, making sure he was okay. Even exhausted and scared, even after everything he'd been through, Titan was trying to take care of his person. Shaw felt something break inside his chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. "We're okay, buddy," he whispered. "We're going to make it. I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make, but he made it anyway. They came to a clearing, and Thompson checked his GPS. 1.2 kilometers to extraction. "We're making good time." "Too good," Rodriguez said, and there was something in his voice that made everyone stop. "It's too quiet. Listen." He was right. The jungle had gone silent again, the same oppressive quiet that had preceded the attack at the river. No birds, no monkeys, no insects, just silence, heavy and expectant. "It's here," Martinez whispered. "Somewhere close. It's here." They formed a defensive circle, weapons out, scanning the undergrowth. Shaw could feel his heart hammering, could feel Titan's body rigid with tension against his chest. Where was it? The jungle was too dense, too dark. The snake could be 10 feet away, and they wouldn't see it until it struck. Then Shaw saw a movement in his peripheral vision, something that didn't belong. A massive coil, dark and wet, sliding between two trees 30 meters away. The Anaconda had gotten ahead of them, somehow, had used the river system to cut them off. "Contact, 9 o'clock, Shaw shouted. "Go, everyone move." They ran. There was no tactical formation now, no careful movement. They crashed through the jungle like wounded animals, because that's what they were. Behind them, Shaw could hear something massive moving through the undergrowth, hear branches breaking, and leaves rustling as hundreds of pounds of predator gave chase. The snake was faster than it should be, faster than any creature that size had a right to be. Shaw caught glimpses of it through the trees, that massive body moving in lateral undulations, propelling itself forward with horrifying speed. It was angry now, he could sense it. They'd injured it, humiliated it, and now it wanted revenge with a single-mindedness that was almost human in its intensity. Shaw's legs were giving out. Each breath was agony, each step a monumental effort. He was slowing down, falling behind the team. Martinez noticed and dropped back, grabbing Shaw's arm. "Come on, Captain. We're almost there." "Go," Shaw gasped. "Get to extraction. That's an order." "Respectfully, sir." "Screw your orders." Martinez threw Shaw's arm over his shoulder and hauled him forward. "We're all getting out or none of us are." They burst through a line of trees, and suddenly they were there, the extraction point. A clearing barely large enough for a helicopter to land. Thompson was already on the radio, calling in their location, his voice urgent and clipped. "Eagle 1, this is Viper 6. We need immediate extraction. We have wounded, we are under attack, requesting emergency evac now." The radio crackled. "Viper 6, Eagle 1, roger that. ETA 12 minutes. Can you hold?" 12 minutes. An eternity. "We don't have a choice," Rodriguez muttered. "Setting up a firing position at the edge of the clearing. Whatever's coming through that jungle, it's stopping here." They didn't have to wait long. The undergrowth at the far side of the clearing erupted, and the Anaconda emerged into the open. In the full light of day, it was even more terrifying. 25 feet of muscle and rage, covered in mud and leaves, with one eye swollen and bloody from where Titan had attacked it. The snake's head swiveled back and forth, tasting the air, and then those yellow eyes locked onto Shaw. It recognized him. Shaw could see it in those cold reptilian eyes. This wasn't about hunger anymore. This was personal. "Light it up," Rodriguez screamed, and the team opened fire. The sound of automatic weapons fire in the enclosed clearing was deafening. Bullets tore into the snake's body, and Shaw could see the impacts, could see scales shattering and dark blood welling up. But the snake kept coming, kept moving forward with that horrible, relentless determination. "Aim for the head," Shaw shouted, fumbling for his own sidearm with one hand, while the other held Titan's sling. But his hand wasn't working right, wasn't gripping the way it should. Blood loss, shock, too many injuries. The Anaconda was 10 feet away. Then 5, and then, from Shaw's chest, came a sound that froze everyone in place, a snarl so fierce, so full of rage and protective fury, that it seemed impossible it came from a puppy. Titan was struggling in the sling, trying to get free, trying to get between his person and the threat. Even now, even after everything, the little warrior wanted to fight. Shaw held him tighter, held him close. "No, buddy," Shaw whispered. "Not this time. You've done enough." The snake's head rose up, preparing to strike. Rodriguez and Martinez were reloading. Thompson was still on the radio, screaming for the extraction bird. They'd done everything right, and it wasn't going to be enough. The snake was too close, too fast, too angry to be stopped by bullets that barely penetrated its armored hide. Shaw closed his eyes and pulled Titan as close as he could, ready to use his own body to shield the puppy one last time. And then the sky opened up with thunder. The helicopter came in low and fast, a Black Hawk attack bird that had been running close air support for another operation 20 miles away. The pilot had heard the desperation in Thompson's voice and had broken protocol, abandoned his assigned mission, and come running. The door gunner opened up with the M134 minigun, and 6,000 rounds per minute turned the jungle into splinters. The Anaconda, caught in the open, took direct hits that no amount of armored scales could withstand. Its body jerked and spasmed. And finally, the ancient predator's nervous system reached critical damage. It collapsed in a heap 5 feet from shore, its massive body still twitching with residual nerve impulses. The helicopter touched down, and hands were pulling Shaw aboard, pulling his whole team to safety. Shaw held onto Titan through all of it, refused to let go even when the medic tried to take the puppy to check his injuries. "He stays with me," Shaw gasped. "He doesn't leave my sight." As the helicopter lifted off, Shaw looked down at the jungle below. He could see the anaconda's body, already being swarmed by smaller predators and scavengers. Nature was efficient, nothing went to waste in the Amazon. By tomorrow, there would be nothing left but bones and stories. But they would survive. His team would go home. And it was all because a 40-pound puppy had been brave enough to fight a monster. Shaw felt consciousness slipping away, felt the darkness pulling him down. But before it took him completely, he felt Titan's rough tongue licking his face, and he heard the medic saying, "Hang on, Captain, you're going to make it. You're both going to make it." And for the first time since they'd entered the water that morning, Shaw believed it. Shaw woke up 3 days later in a military hospital in San Diego. The first thing he saw was white ceiling tiles. The second thing was Titan's face, those brown eyes staring at him from a dog bed that someone had placed right next to his hospital bed. "You're awake?" a voice said, and Shaw turned his head carefully, because everything still hurt to see Martinez sitting in a chair, looking exhausted but grinning. "About damn time, Captain. We were starting to think you were going to sleep forever." "The team?" Shaw's voice was rough, his throat raw from the intubation tube they'd had to use during surgery. "Everyone made it. Jenkins." Martinez's face fell. "We recovered his body 2 days ago. Local assets went back with proper equipment. He's coming home." Shaw closed his eyes. Jenkins had been 26 years old, with a wife and a baby daughter he'd never get to see grow up. The mission had cost them dearly. "The snake?" Shaw asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. "Confirmed dead." Local wildlife officials went to investigate after we reported it. 26 feet, 4 inches, 547 pounds. They're saying it's the largest anaconda ever officially documented in Peru. The thing was a living dinosaur, Captain. The fact that we survived it at all is a miracle. Shaw looked at Titan. The puppy had bandages on his paws and a shaved patch on his side where he'd been scratched by the snake's scales. But otherwise, he looked okay. More than okay, he looked proud, sitting there with his chest puffed out, his ears alert. "They wanted to take him to the K9 facilities," Martinez continued. "Standard procedure for working dogs after a mission. But he wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just sat by the door and howled. The handlers said they'd never seen anything like it. So I pulled some strings, told them you'd ordered the dog to stay with you for psychological evaluation. Total BS. But they bought it." "Thank you," Shaw whispered. He reached out his hand, and Titan immediately stood up, put his front paws on the edge of the bed, and licked Shaw's fingers. The puppy's tail was wagging so hard his whole back end was shaking. "He saved my life," Shaw said. "Saved all of us. I've served with some brave men, Martinez, but what that puppy did..." His voice broke. "He's 6 months old. 6 months. And he attacked a monster because I was in trouble. How do you even begin to repay that?" "You don't," Martinez said quietly. "You just make sure everyone knows what he did. Make sure his story gets told." Over the next few weeks, as Shaw recovered from his injuries, 5 broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, and severe bruising that would leave scars for the rest of his life, Titan's story spread through the military community like wildfire. A puppy who attacked an anaconda to save his handler. It was the kind of story that seemed too incredible to be true, except there were 5 witnesses and mission footage from their helmet cams to back it up. The video footage was classified. Delta Force operations didn't make it to YouTube, but senior brass reviewed it. They watched that tiny puppy swim into danger without hesitation. They saw him attack a creature 20 times his size. They saw the kind of courage and loyalty that couldn't be trained, only born into a dog's very soul. 6 weeks after the mission, when Shaw was finally cleared to return to active duty status, there was a ceremony. The team had tried to keep it small, low-key, just a formality. But word had gotten out, and by the time they assembled in the parade ground at Fort Bragg, there were over 200 people in attendance. Special Forces operators, handlers, trainers, support staff, and even some reporters who'd been given special clearance. Shaw stood at attention in his dress uniform, his ribs still aching but healing. Next to him sat Titan, wearing a brand new tactical vest that had been custom fitted for his growing body. The puppy was nearly 7 months old now, bigger and stronger, but still with that same alert, intelligent expression. Colonel Richardson, their commanding officer, stood before them with what looked like a jewelry box in his hands. His voice carried across the parade ground, strong and clear. In the history of military working dogs, there have been countless acts of bravery. Dogs who located IEDs and saved entire platoons. Dogs who held off enemy combatants while their handlers evacuated. Dogs who gave their lives in service to their country and their teams. But rarely, perhaps never, has there been a case quite like this. He opened the box and lifted out a medal, a K9 Medal of Courage, one of the highest honors that could be bestowed on a working dog. On August 14th, in the Peruvian Amazon, military working dog Titan, at the age of 6 months and with no combat experience, displayed extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming danger. When his handler was attacked by a hostile force, Titan entered the engagement without hesitation, without training, and without regard for his own safety. His actions directly resulted in the survival of his handler and his team. Richardson knelt down in front of Titan and attached the medal to his vest. Titan, who had been sitting perfectly still, looked up at Shaw as if asking for permission. Shaw nodded, and Titan's tail began to wag. The crowd erupted in applause. Furthermore, Richardson continued, standing and addressing Shaw directly, "It is the determination of this command that military working dog Titan has demonstrated capabilities far exceeding his age and training level, effective immediately. He is hereby certified as a full combat-ready K9 operator and will be permanently assigned to Delta Force Team Viper as their official K9 unit." More applause. Shaw could see his team in the crowd: Rodriguez, Martinez, Thompson, all of them grinning like idiots, all of them with tears in their eyes. They'd seen what that puppy had done, they'd been there. After the ceremony, after the photos and the handshakes and the congratulations, Shaw finally got a moment alone with Titan in the team's ready room. He knelt down still carefully, his ribs protesting, and looked the dog in the eyes. "You know you're stuck with me now, right?" Shaw said. "Official assignment, you and me, buddy. Partners." Titan barked once, sharp and happy, and then did something he'd never done. Before he raised his right paw and placed it in Shaw's hand. A shake, a deal, a promise between a warrior and his dog. Shaw had to look away for a moment, had to wipe his eyes. He'd been in the military for 15 years. He'd received medals, commendations, recognition from generals and politicians. But this moment, this simple gesture from a 7-month-old puppy who'd been brave enough to fight a monster, meant more than all of that combined. News of Titan's actions, while classified in its specifics, began to spread through the military working dog community and beyond. The handlers who'd dismissed him as too small, too young, too much of a mistake, quietly stopped using that nickname. Now he was just Titan, and the name fit. 3 months after the ceremony, Shaw returned to the Amazon as part of a follow-up operation. This time, Titan was with him, officially certified and equipped. When they approached river crossings, Shaw noticed something interesting. Titan would still show caution, would still check the water carefully before entering. He wasn't fearless. He'd learned that the world held dangers that could kill him. But when Shaw gave the command to cross, Titan would do it without hesitation. Because fear wasn't the absence of courage. Courage was doing what needed to be done even when you were afraid. The local tribes in the area where they'd been attacked had their own interpretation of what had happened. The story had spread among the river communities, the tale of the black coil, the monster Anaconda that had killed many people over the years, and how it had finally been defeated not by hunters with guns, but by a spirit dog, small and fierce, who'd challenged the serpent to protect his pack. They called Titan Aya Olkua, in Quechua spirit dog. When Shaw and his team worked with local assets on operations, the indigenous guides would always want to see Titan, to touch him, to tell their children that they'd met the dog who'd fought a monster and won. 2 years after the Amazon incident, Shaw was offered a promotion that would take him to a command position at Fort Benning. It was a career-making opportunity, the kind of assignment that led to full colonel and beyond. But it would mean a desk job. It would mean leaving field operations. It would mean leaving Titan behind. Shaw turned it down without hesitation. "My place is with my team," he told Colonel Richardson. "And my partner." Richardson, who'd been in the military long enough to understand what that really meant, simply nodded. I figured you'd say that. For what it's worth, I would have made the same choice. Because some bonds couldn't be broken by rank or ambition or the promise of a better future. Some bonds were forged in dark water, with death circling close, when a puppy decided that love was worth fighting for. 5 years after the incident in the Amazon, Shaw retired from active duty. He was 38 years old, his body worn down by years of operations in the world's hardest places. Titan, now 5.5 years old, retired with him. They moved to a small town in Montana, where the weather was cool and there were mountains to hike and no rivers full of monsters. Titan had earned his rest. He'd served on 23 more missions after the Amazon, had located enemy combatants, had alerted the team to IEDs, had done everything a military working dog was supposed to do. He wore his Medal of Courage on his vest during every operation, and it became a good luck charm for the team when Titan was with them. They felt invincible. But the Amazon was the mission they all remembered. The one they talked about when they got together for reunions. The one that became a legend within Delta Force. Told to new recruits as an example of what loyalty and courage really looked like. On quiet evenings, Shaw would sit on his porch with Titan beside him, and he'd remember that morning at the river. He'd remember the pressure of the coils, the darkness closing in, the certainty that he was going to die. And he'd remember a puppy's bark, high-pitched and desperate, coming through the water like a lifeline. "You saved me, buddy," Shaw would whisper, his hand buried in Titan's fur. "You were just a baby, and you saved me." Titan, older now and wiser, would lean against Shaw's leg and look up at him with those same brown eyes that had stared into the face of a monster and hadn't blinked. And Shaw knew that Titan would do it again, would do it 1,000 times, without hesitation, because that was what love meant. That was what loyalty meant. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face fear for someone you love. The Amazon had taught them both that lesson in the hardest way possible. But it was a lesson neither of them would ever forget. If this story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you of the incredible bond between humans and the animals who serve alongside them, then share it. Share it with everyone you know. Because in a world that often feels dark and uncertain, we need reminders that courage comes in all sizes, that loyalty is real, and that love is worth fighting for. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of incredible animals who've done extraordinary things. Comment, Amen, below if you believe in the power of loyalty, in the bond between a warrior and their dog, in the idea that the smallest among us can be the bravest. And if you ever meet a military working dog, thank them. Thank their handler. These teams put their lives on the line in ways most of us will never understand, in places most of us will never see, fighting enemies both human and natural. Titan is retired now, living his best life in Montana, chasing squirrels and napping in the sun. But somewhere in the Amazon, on the banks of a dark river, there's a legend that's still being told by the people who live there. A legend about a spirit dog who was brave enough to fight a monster, small enough to be underestimated, and loyal enough to risk everything for the human he loved. That's not just a story about a dog, it's a story about all of us. About finding courage when we think we have none. About being there for the people we love even when it terrifies us. About proving that heart matters more than size. Titan proved that on one afternoon in the Amazon, and his story will be told for generations to come. A reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes barely 40 pounds, sometimes just 6 months old. But always, always, with a heart bigger than any monster. God bless our military working dogs. God bless the handlers who love them. And God bless the bond between them, which is stronger than steel and deeper than any river, even one that runs through the heart of the Amazon. Share this story. Subscribe for more. And comment, Amen if you believe. Because stories like Titan's deserve to be told. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to inspire us to be braver, to be more loyal, to love more fiercely. That's what Titan would want. That's what any true warrior would want. To be remembered not for their size or their strength, but for their courage and their heart. Amen.